It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I couldn't be more amped up to talk today with my guest. Joining me is Jorge Soto, the original founder of Sales for Startups, which is a company that he's created that was dedicated to helping educate non-sales entrepreneurs about how to sell, which was a passion of mine, a passion of his. And he sold that company, is now part of the growing sales hacker empire. And Jorge is also involved, I know, in a startup role with Node.io. So, Jorge, welcome to the show.
Andy, thank you so much. First of all, we were just chatting a little while ago about how long we've known each other. And if you remember, we met each other about 5 years ago in Boston with Matt Bellows and Cliff Paulin, and we were doing that event at Microsoft Nerd Center. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No, that was fun. That was a great time. It was a great group of entrepreneurs. Kind of a strange room we were doing it in. It's the proverbial mile wide and an inch deep, but yeah, it was a great group of guys there, people there that entrepreneurs that I think really fit the profile of what you were dealing with, which was non-engineers, people that don't have sales in their background or marketing in their background and had great ideas and were executing it and needed to get that knowledge about how to get their product to market.
Yeah, I think for me, it was interesting when I got out to the Valley for the third time, and I was trying to start a company, or I'd launched a company through an incubator called AngelPad. And it became very clear to me very, very fast that the tech community really wasn't taking the sales profession seriously. And it became very frustrating for me just because people literally would not talk to me if I wasn't an engineer or didn't take me seriously. And then there was this shift where people started to come up to me and say, hey, I need to understand how to get 5 customers or some customer feedback. And then that was sort of the thesis behind building Sales for Startups. And it was a great opportunity to be able to meet thousands of founders and early employees and really help them think through this sales process that I like to call like the early stage, minimum viable sales process, where we don't really know what we're doing. And it's this weird thing because you don't really, you understand these fundamental steps that always exist in sales, but you don't really understand like the macro climate that well. You don't really know if your message is resonating. You need to really focus on understanding who that ideal customer is and go through the hustle and grind that is that process of discovery. So I had an awesome opportunity to do that, and I love that we were able to roll up into Sales Hacker and continue that mission.
Yeah, I mean, you were putting on events all around the country for entrepreneurs. And as you said, it really is a process. That early stage selling really is a process of discovery. I mean, you can plan it out all you want, but until you go out and test it with people who don't know you, right? Like, the term, the unaffiliated customer, you really don't know what it is that you're selling.
Yeah, totally. I was just so I was in Miami doing an event at an incubator there, workspace called building.co down in Miami, Florida. I'm from there originally. And it was really interesting because everyone, we had a nice crowd and it seemed like most people, maybe not everyone, but most people were asking me, what's the silver bullet? Like, what is the sales strategy that's going to get us to, 100 customers or to, $1 million in revenue or whatnot? And it's interesting because you have a ton of folks out there who are sort of, selling the dream. And for me, it's a big experiment. I have no idea. Now, there are a variety of tactics and processes and sure things that I think, I can speak for myself that I've learned over the years that certainly don't work.
But well, it's interesting conjunction. You said the sure things that don't work.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are those sure things that don't work?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple things that don't work, and it's interesting because they're not like very particular tactics. They're more like higher level esoteric stuff, like having the wrong team, right? Like if you're, and I'm speaking from a startup perspective. In just to be clear, I've never lasted at a big company, where I was, one of 10,000 salespeople. So I don't actually know that. My perspective has always been as a founder. I always like to make very clear that I'm an entrepreneur first. I'm a salesperson second, right? And, for me, like a fundamental thing that will surely never work is having the wrong team, right? Like having someone who's not willing to put forth the effort and organize themselves in a way to be able to be flexible and agile enough to understand the right things, right? Or at least to collect the data or insight that they need to collect to be able to start to kind of determine what things are not working. So for me, it's not about necessarily knowing the stuff that works, right off the bat, but the things that don't work, because it's also interesting because the things that work today are not going to work tomorrow, and it's just like, I don't know how long it's going to take till they don't work. And so those are some of the problems with scale, where it's like really easy when you have one person, when I'm the only prospector / salesperson, but now I need to scale a team of several other people. And now I have to actually deal with personalities and life and everything else. Like, how do you now start to develop, as we were discussing earlier, a culture around the human, and not just say, hey, I'm going to hire, 5 guys or gals from Cal Chico University or whatever and buy a bunch of software and we're going to generate a ton of business. Sure, like that's part of it. You need software, you need people and these sorts of things, but we forget about the people component. And for me, that's the most important. So just to kind of go back to what we were saying, one of the sure failures or things that I think in my experience will lead to failure.
Guaranteed. We'll call it guaranteed failure mode.
Yeah, guaranteed failure mode is like having the wrong team. And the other thing that I've realized, and I hate to say this because I'm such an impulsive person by nature, but it's poor preparation or acting too fast. And I'm not saying that you should act slow and so, for example, like overthink a target list or something like that, and I think that for me it's also really important to be able to execute, and progress is more important in my view than perfection, but you don't want to completely botch it, right? So finding that balance is hard. How do you do that? How do you kind of figure out these qualitative aspects of this experience you're dealing with and the quantitative stuff, right? So,
well, I think that one of the things right. And I think one of the things that you would go along with that, though, that, sort of a sure failure mode, at least I've seen in my experience with startups, is that if the entrepreneur hasn't invested themselves in learning how to sell what they have developed, what they're creating, then that also then becomes a pretty sure failure mode. I find that if the entrepreneurs try to keep themselves separate and say, look, I'm going to build this team, but I'm not going to go out and get my hands dirty because I'm not going to learn really what it is we have and why people are buying it. To me, that has been a pretty guaranteed failure mode as well.
Absolutely. The way I've seen this manifest is a founder, maybe an engineer, or maybe even a BD person who was great at BD at Google, right? Which is very, very different than selling your widget that no one A, cares about because they have no idea what it does, and B, has no idea who you are, right?
Exactly.
If they get some friendlies, who you can call up and say, hey, will you kick the tires on our widget? And they might say, yeah, I got some budget here, fine, right? But, when we start to scale and really build an organization, that's, like your ability to understand is incredibly important. So you might see that founder, again, BD person from Google or, some other great larger organization, or an engineer who just says, oh, here's a salesperson. They'll figure it out. They can sell this thing. I see the vision, right? But they don't really actually know. They don't know the trials and tribulations of actually trying to sell or distribute this product. And I think that's incredibly important. Like if you don't sell, if you're a CEO out there and you are not selling before your first sales hire, that's a very big problem. Now, I think you can get away with it if you understand that perhaps your core competency is not maybe, interfacing with the external world, and you hire someone who's going to manage that kind of part of your business. I think if you're transparent, you might be able to get around this issue. But there's just no way that I could ever hire someone to do a job that I don't actually understand myself. Right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And also the thing with, especially in the startup world, is that the founders and CEOs are selling from day one because they're going out to raise money, right? That's a sales job right there. So totally. if you can bring yourself to put together a presentation and present it to the venture community, the investment community, not a whole lot different from selling your product and your value proposition to a customer.
Yeah, totally. I think you also touched on something that's been quite interesting. The fact that people think that sales is this magical thing at times, and they don't understand that I don't know anyone who does business of any kind that's not selling something, whether it's selling, the ability to like me as an individual, or selling someone on the concept of joining my company and taking risk. And, these are all conversations that have some sort of desired outcome. And for me, that's sales, right? It's not like this crazy, magical, complex thing, right? Like sales scaling systems and things like that. Obviously you have to sit down and think about and et cetera. But like there's a conversation, right? And the conversation has an outcome. And whether it's, you going out to dinner with me or, buying my widget, right? There's still conversation. Now, obviously it's a different, it's this different sales cycle, quote unquote. If I'm trying to convince you, Andy, to come to dinner with me versus some organization buying my software, multiple people, process, maybe it's going to take longer. But at its core, what is it, right? At its core, it's this communication. And if you can distill it down to a communication level, and that's what I love about your books. And I've always been a fan of you as a thought leader and as an author and as a consultant, because you've really taken an incredible view, in my view, of this process, and you've distilled it down to levels of granularity that I think are incredibly important. And that's sales for me. Like when we talk about, well, what is sales now? There's some great books out there that talk about process and tools and things like that. But if you don't understand what's underneath that, and the day that you hit the wall, which we all do, right? As salespeople, I mean, it's life, right? When you hit the wall and you don't actually understand the psychology or the philosophies or, underneath all that tech and process and why your emails are not working, then you really, that's when you start to struggle. I've seen reps do that. I felt that myself when I was learning how to sell stuff, within some organized process or, company. So it was really interesting, right? Like if we think about it, and if we can really understand what's underneath all this stuff, or why is that person responding? Why is that to this type of email versus this other type of email? It doesn't, like for me, it doesn't matter what the text is. There's some kind of there's some psychology that's underneath that is underneath that word or that statement or that title or subject or whatever, that is generating some action inside of a human for some reason. It's stimulating something. For me, that's what I'm always trying to figure out, right? And that's what I'm always very excited about. Because then once you understand that, in my view, of course, my opinion, then the tactics and the tools and all that stuff are a piece of cake, right? So that's kind of my opinion on it.
Well, it relates the same way to talking to people, not just, emailing them, but through repetition, you learn what you can say, or more importantly, what you can ask that opens the door, right? The blinders open up, the people's defenses go down, and suddenly they want to engage. And it's based on, again, something you say. To my way of thinking, it's usually a question that really is the way that gets that triggered. And so I said, through repetition, you learn exactly what that is. And that really becomes selling, because you're right. It's not just the process. It's not the quantity of things. Ultimately, it comes down to the quality of something you execute with another human being. And that's going to make the difference between you and somebody else.
Isn't that interesting, Andy? I mean, you've been in business longer than I have, much longer than I have, and you got a tremendous amount of experience on me. However, isn't it interesting that we always go back to this concept, and the concept is, and it's actually outside of sales in general. I think it's almost like a fundamental thing in life where it always goes down to, or back to rather, quality over quantity. Like that's always the thing, and I hopefully nowadays, we were talking about technologies out there and the amount of data and all that. Like, I think for me, all the data that's out there with on the internet or in sales tools, et cetera, should be really pushing us to be more of a, quality over quantity process, right? And have a more personalized approach. I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like, that's what should happen. I remember when I was in SDR, and remember, just for the folks out there, I started selling door to door, and that was the first time I started to understand sales cycles, when I was in graduate school. So I did that for about 3 years, and I understood a sales cycle at a very granular level. So for me, it was really easy to move upwards once I got to the SaaS world and enterprise world, because I was like, well, I was selling and understanding at the conversation level. Now we're talking about, sending emails and I now have this brand. I have a marketing team that's building brand and making it, easier for me to break in, knock on wood, theoretically, break into organizations, so that personalized approach, that human approach that you talk about in all your books is so important. And it drives me nuts when people don't just don't think about that, and they don't take that into account. One tactic that everyone listening to the show should try out, if you're not already, is say the person's name a couple times in the conversation. You're going to trigger their brain to go, oh, that's me. Yeah. Get them back in the conversation. Right. And so that personalized approach, like that thing, the value proposition, blah, 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 is, certainly, of importance within a sales conversation. But, that human piece, how can you like embed statements or activities, or I don't want to say give the guy or gal a hug, in most cultures, that's probably, a no-no, but how do you embed that stuff? How do you truly develop a relationship? How do you become more vulnerable as a salesperson within the realm of reason and of course, respect, right?
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, it's about being mindful. It's being in the moment. And that's really, I think, very hard for a lot of salespeople is, without getting too sort of zen about it, but is, this whole concept of mindfulness and being present really becomes very effective for salespeople, because they're there and all they're focused on is the prospect. I mean, with every ounce of their being, they're focused on that person. And yeah, you'd be surprised. I mean, I have sort of I don't know, test, if you will, but going to calls sometimes with salespeople, and I was managing them, and maybe to be a relatively like a second call or something, they had brought me along, or maybe I was doing a ride along on some cold calls, and about 70% of the time, the sales rep won't have remembered the prospect's name.
Yep.
And of course, they couldn't use it during the meeting because they couldn't remember it, but that's because they were so focused on what they were going to say, right? What they, the sales rep, as opposed to, let me engage this other individual as a person, and we're going to have a communication and a conversation that engages their interest, and knowing the name, if you're really present, really becomes a big part of that. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back. We're going to continue this great conversation with Jorge Soto, and we'll be back in just a second.
Hi, this is Andy. Connect and Sell is used by sales reps at nearly 1,000 companies, including hundreds of technology startups and several Fortune 500 companies, to overcome the challenges of getting prospects on the phone. Companies using Connect and Sell grow their revenues faster by enabling their sales reps to have more sales conversations in 90 minutes than they could otherwise achieve in an entire week. Connect and Sell can be deployed directly to your sales reps, or you can take advantage of their outbound on-demand service, which delivers qualified prospect meetings scheduled directly on your sales reps' calendars. Visit connectandsell.com to learn more about how Connect and Sell can start filling your pipeline today.
And we're back with my guest today, Jorge Soto. We're talking about sales for startups, an organization he started that he has since sold to the Sales Hacker Group, which did a great job educating entrepreneurs about what it's like once you start a company. You actually have to sell the product you're creating. And I sort of want to I know you've got a passion for how you think sales is going to evolve, and I want to talk about that here for a few minutes too. I want to start by by asking about the saying you have in your Skype profile. You say that a successful man is one who builds a firm foundation out of the bricks others have thrown at him. So who's throwing bricks at you?
Wow. Andy, you've known me for 5 years, so I'm going to give you the raw and real. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I was brought into this world by two great parents, two parents that, I'm an only child that if I didn't have, I'm not sure I would be sitting here today. So I got lucky, but one thing that I observed was I was growing up in the 80s and 90s in Miami where it was nuts. I mean, you didn't hear about innovation. You heard about, the Pablo Escobar, don't walk in the streets at night and these sorts of things. And, at a very young age, I just didn't really understand the value of entrepreneurship or even education. I mean, if you think about most of the individuals that I grew up with didn't go to college or had other outcomes in their life and took different paths. And so, I guess, I started to develop a chip on my shoulder when I was a teenager, and you had to be sort of tough, right? Like in my communities, you had to defend yourself, not get picked on and whatever, right? And, I'm blessed that I was able to not make foolish mistakes like so many others do every day in these communities, but I always had that. I felt like I like the bricks were being tossed my way, since I was a young child. Things started happening. I still, it's really interesting. As you get older, I'm in my mid 30s now, and I've gone through this weird evolution where I'm starting to become incredibly self-aware of the good things and the bad things, right? And I remember sitting there recently thinking about my view on what's driven me to just always be so fearless. And I was raised to be fearless. I was raised to be fearless by my family, and my mother in particular is one of the most fearless individuals I've ever met. Super inspiring. And for me, it was I wasn't the tallest kid. I wasn't the strongest kid. I wasn't the fastest kid. I loved sports, but I was too short to dunk and, too small to play running back and too short to play second base, which I love baseball. I play baseball. My dad's Cuban, and it's a big thing in our culture. And I found something, later in life, once I started going through high school, I had tremendous troubles. If you went back to my high school and you talked to the principal, they would probably not believe that I am, outside of Miami and doing some cool things here in Silicon Valley. And so I think that I started to develop that chip, and I started to develop that kind of thicker skin, at least at the surface level, for challenge. And then I ultimately started to understand that challenge was in myself, in my own mind, and sure, people could trigger certain things within me or within us as humans that will cause us to behave certain ways. But ultimately that's a stimulus or stimuli that's coming in, that you're interacting with and you're having to do something with. And so again, to your question, I feel like whether it's some story or narrative that I've created in my mind since I was a kid, or maybe there are some very real and valid reasons. I felt like bricks were thrown at me for a long time. As I mentioned, I wasn't a great student. I had to work my tail off to get through college, and I was a very slow reader. And because I wasn't raised to read, I was doing other stuff. I was out climbing a tree or getting in trouble in the neighborhood. And so. I was more of an artist, and I didn't really understand myself that well. And so, I think that it is, it's a healthy thing to be able to have that courage or to develop that mechanism to be resilient. I think that within the context of sales, when I got an opportunity to sell stuff and I understood I was selling. So, the first memory I have is, of course, selling cookies, door to door in my neighborhood from the school, and then, as silly as this sounds, but getting into fistfights in the neighborhood, where you felt like you had to be tough and not be messed with, that was like the basis of developing courage. And now, nowadays, obviously that behavior is, I don't engage in that kind of behavior, deal with my no
fistfights.
Yeah, no fistfights today. Yeah, I'm a little too small nowadays, right? People grew up. And, but I think you display courage in other ways. And for me, as I was mentioning, my first experience with sales, I was selling, shoes at a store in Miami, and I crushed it. And I was selling more replacement plans on like shoes, which didn't even make sense.
Replacement. So, I started off selling shoes as well. So a replacement plan. So what's a replacement plan on a shoe?
Yeah, if like the sole fell off or broke or something, you could get...
It's like an extended warranty.
Yeah, the extended warranties, exactly. We called them replacement plans. And it was like, $15 or $20 or whatever. But the management was just absolutely like astounded. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand that I was actually just like having a conversation, developing rapport, telling people, walking them through a quote unquote demo in their minds of why they should buy this thing, instilling enough doubt about the need for buying this replacement plan that they would actually say, okay, great, right? Like I'll buy it for $15 more and et cetera. So, I started to understand sales at that point, and I loved the challenge. And then I realized I didn't actually care. And one of the things about me was like, I didn't care what everyone else was doing. I cared about my own internal dialogue and like the fact that I needed to be great at whatever it is I was doing. And that, trickled over into, college. When I got to college, I'm not the A student. I'm not. It's funny. I was just listening to Gary what's his name? Vandercheck. And I was just laughing because he talks a lot of like, we share a very similar story of what I know about him, not great in school and these sorts of things. But I was just so determined to prove to myself that ultimately I had some worth, and at a deep level. And when I got involved with doing door-to-door sales in college, I was like an entrepreneur. My first venture was selling tickets to a bus that we used to send kids from Tallahassee, Florida, at Florida State University to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. And, we'd make $60 a ticket. And, my buddy Julio and I would, party with that money. And so I love that because it was hard. But on top of that, I was able to do something with with the only thing that I knew. And at that time, and maybe till this day, maybe what I really enjoy is communicating with people, right? And moving people through an outcome. And then when I got into door-to-door sales, I started to really understand sales cycles because I got trained and yada, yada. And the story goes on.
You had the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing that, I started off driving to, not after I sold shoes in high school, but my first job in professional sales is, I'd drive to a business park in the East Bay area of the San Francisco Bay Area, get on my car and walk and make cold calls all day long. And you can't underestimate how much you learn, because now people talk about, getting through gatekeepers. Well, actually, there was a physical gatekeeper I had to get through. There was a person sitting behind a desk that I had to get through to talk to somebody, not somebody on a phone. And it was, vastly different.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story, Andy. My first web business that I started as a founder, I invested all my savings, had my mother take out a second mortgage on her home, which is astounding for me to think about now, and in many ways pains me because that venture failed. But it was, in any case, was a startup called MyTrips, MYTRIPZ.com. And if you Google it, you can see Pete Cashmore making fun of it back in 2005. And I had no idea how to run digital marketing. There was no social graph. There's no Twitter. There was none of this stuff, right? Like maybe there was some AdWord campaigns and things like that, but the virality that exists online today didn't exist then. And so my default was, you name it. I would drive up to universities, hand out flyers, sneak into university computer labs, and pretend I was a computer science student and ask people to try out my new website. And so I physically signed up about 1,200 people over maybe 3 years, which, as we know, is a completely inefficient way of customer acquisition, right? But that was my default. And my point in telling you the story is that I think that chip on the shoulder, that courage, that desire of just like, I am not going to allow myself to give up. Now that could go, that has its good and bad, right? Like, I think that a smart entrepreneur also has to understand when it is time to transition to something else, or, hey, accept that this particular thing didn't work.
Right.
I think where I have the problem with is just not trying and then giving up too early and not giving yourself a chance to succeed. However, I do also have a problem just personally. I've lost a lot of money and put myself in some very challenging financial situations over the last 12, 13 years by not being mature enough to understand when it's time to pull the plug.
Sure.
Right. And if you think about it within the context of sales, there is a point where, they're not ready right now. Like, they're just, there's no buying cycle. There's no, but whatever it is that's happening, they bought another competitor. I'm not saying give up, but what I'm saying is, like, you have to almost like detach yourself from the outcome and say, hey, I'm going to, I've done everything that I could. As long as I left it on the field, I'm okay. And I think that's probably one of the most definitive concepts for me is, did I leave it all on the field? And what I'll add to that is, for me, Andy, I'm just a guy, like, I like to call myself a philosopher. My father is actually like a real philosopher, has a master's and spent 3 years in a monastery in Spain when he was in his late 20s. So he shared a lot about mindfulness and things like that with me. And, I think that, again, circling back to the human component, I think this is about developing excellence in people, developing a mindset or shifting their paradigm. And the paradigm for me is not necessarily that you're going to win all the time, because you're not. And it's accepting that and not saying that I'm going to be shielded from pain, because that's not true. This is not actually reality, right? This is not life to believe that we're never going to feel pain. But I think the distinction here for me is to have the courage to try, to have the mindfulness to understand what you're doing, and have the mindfulness and courage to be able to walk away when it's no longer serving you in the right way or not working out. And developing a level of intelligent fearlessness. Intelligent fearlessness is very interesting. And, like the fearlessness that I saw when I was a child growing up with, all these gangs and all this craziness around me, that's not what I'm talking about. There may be some like courage and fearlessness there that's misguided, and that's fine. But what that actually taught me was like, oh, wow, there is this very profound energy that exists within us, and that we need to understand how to channel appropriately. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if you think about yourself as a salesperson, how do you get kicked in the ego every day? How do you do that and keep a positive attitude and keep going and not get your mind in the gutter, And how do you do that? And I think like what I've been able to at least the guy that I want to be, the winner, the leader, the success story, all these narratives that I have in my head since I was a kid that I want to be is a leader that has these other attributes, has the compassion, has the ability to be thoughtful for others and put others first and serve others and all that, understanding that I will be imperfect and will have my days, moments, weeks, months, years, where I'm a little off, right? Where I'm not being my best, and having that forgiveness for myself. Because if you think about it, you're going to have your bad weeks in sales, right? Like when I was a door-to-door salesperson, I remember my manager, a great guy, by the way, Andy, I got to introduce you to him. His name is Brian Ross. He is the real deal. This guy is still managing direct sales teams, selling insurance door to door in his, late 40s, right? Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is he doesn't even actually understand how brilliant that he is, because he's never used any technology to do this stuff. It's still, very old school. And so, what was I saying a second ago? I kind of lost track there.
Well, I mean, we were talking about, the courage, the fearless.
Yeah, the fearlessness, exactly. When you think about being the leader, yeah, that's what I was talking about. And Brian Ross taught me this. If you think about being the leader and the type of leader that you want to be, and what he said to me was really interesting. It was like, the best leaders in his view or in his opinion were the most flexible. And if you think about that, it's like the most flexible, and they were flexible enough to be able to deal with different personalities in different situations, and still excel and still put others, first. I mean, that's the kind of individual that I'm striving to be all the time. And I think that is something that, other people should consider,
Yeah, well, I think for sales, you've really touched on a lot of things that are really important in terms of, who are the people that separate themselves from the pack, that can do this for a long time, have this service mentality that puts the customer first, and really has a passion for helping customers make good decisions. And if you can be that person, if you can be there for the prospect and really be there for them, then you have this opportunity to have, I think, a really successful extended career in sales, where many people, as you said, get burned out by sort of the negativity or the ups and the downs of it. And I think the people that last a long time are those that sort of say, as you said, they know there's going to be ups, they know there's going to be downs, and they accept it, that that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah. And so imagine that person, imagine that individual who's so mindful, that salesperson, that sales, manager, right? Who's so mindful and so aware of these things, that now have great tools and now have great processes that they're iterating on, that have the data, to support whatever it is metrics they're going after. Imagine that person. I want that person, right? I want, what I mean? That's who I want. The person who, who's not thoughtful and who make even close a bunch of deals in the short term, and or even close a bunch of deals in general, but they're a cancer to the organization. I mean, these are the things that we don't talk a lot about. We don't talk about the human stuff, right? We don't talk about that rep who's a jerk, who's making everyone else feel terrible. And as a result, now you see your sales goes down. And then what do we do automatically? We start looking at systems, tools, what's going on. Do they know the sales talk? Do they, is the market happening? Well, maybe, but you know what? And you didn't know that it's that cancerous person who's sitting there destroyed. You know what I mean? And Those are the things that I think for me are super, super, super important. I know you see the theme here, and it's the human. It's got to be the human. We got to change the way that people think about this stuff, especially here in Silicon Valley, where we're such a robotic, automate the darn thing type of community, Yep. And again, I think the innovation is phenomenal. It's certainly what excites me about this industry, and why I've dedicated my life's journey to innovating in the technology, galaxy. But let's not forget about the humans. Let's not forget about, the individual, and making sure we're making people better.
All right. Perfect. Okay. Well, we've reached the end of the show, but I want to thank you for joining me. My guest today has been Jorge Soto. And George, tell people how they can find out more about you and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, Andy, I am now part of a startup in the sales intelligence space, specifically trying to help people understand more about the account-based sales intelligence world, and who are the companies they should be going after, who are the people, what should they be saying. It's really within this movement around really bringing the contextual web or the personalized web to life, and we're focused on the B2B sales and marketing use case here in the short term. But our bigger vision, of course, in 20 years is to power the personalized web. In terms of getting in touch with me, I love sales, I love leadership, I love all this stuff. Follow me on Twitter. It's at Soto Ventures, and that's SOTOVENTURES. And then I have a personal blog called sotoventures.com, which I like to call the pulse of the early stage startup. and there's a variety of topics around startups there. And I'm on LinkedIn too. So, just search for my name, Jorge. Middle name is Luis. Last name is Soto, Soto. Hopefully I show up in search results. If not, just tweet at me and I'll be sure to follow you.
I'm sure you will. And if you follow the link to Soto Ventures, a lot of good videos that you've been recording through your travels, quite extensive travels around the world with startups, not just here in the US, but also outside the country. Very interesting stuff.
Oh, that's for another day, Andy. We got to do something on that. I mean,
all right.
The community, the technology community, the sales community, the startup community globally is real, and it's only getting started.
Oh, good. Well, we'll definitely have another session on that. So again, I want to thank George for being here. And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And subscribing to this podcast is an easy way to do that, because then you'll make sure you don't miss any of our conversations with top business experts like our guest today, Jorge Soto, who share their experience and expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining us. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.